2005 through 2012 Toyota RAV4 transmission fluid and filter replacement. I'm Brian Essler from How to Automotive, and I'm going to walk you through the steps of replacing your transmission fluid. First step is to get your vehicle up in the air. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands and get the front of the vehicle up as high as you can, and then remove the lower splash shields by following the perimeter, removing the bolts and clips holding it on. Next, we're going to drain the transmission fluid, so you're going to need a 10mm Allen socket and remove the drain plug. You're also going to need a bucket to catch the fluid. So there's two ways to get this pan off. One is with a wobbly socket like this to get to a couple of the bolts that are underneath this bracket here. And if you have a wobbly socket, you can get to them. Or what you can do is remove the four 17mm bolts holding this little support bracket on, and you can just pull it down out of your way. So I'm going to go ahead and take those bolts out and remove that bracket. I'm using a Milwaukee mid-torque impact gun here with a 17mm socket to make quick work of removing these bolts. The two bolts in the back look like they have a nut on them, and so I backed it up with a 19mm wrench. But after I got it off, I realized it was welded on, so you don't need the actual wrench to remove the bolts. So once you get all four bolts removed, you can peel back the splash shield a little bit and then pull the bracket straight out of the car. Now I'm going to use my Milwaukee 3/8 drive cordless impact gun here to remove all of the bolts holding the transmission pan onto the transmission. This makes really quick work of doing jobs like this. If you guys haven't seen these type of tools, I recommend you check them out. I'll leave a link for them in the description of the video. They really speed up the process of removing pans and bolts like this. Once you get all the bolts removed, it may require a little pry bar to pry the transmission pan down. So now you can remove the old gasket, clean up all the fluid from inside the pan. And also there's going to be 3 magnets inside the transmission pan that we need to remove and clean off all the metal shavings that are on it. This metal shaving is normal. If you see large chunks, that is not normal, and that would be a transmission problem. Now we can go ahead and remove the filter. It has 3 10mm bolts holding it on. So you remove all 3 of those, and then you'll just lightly pry the filter down. And some fluid will come out, so be careful not to get splashed. So now you're ready to reinstall the transmission filter by putting it into position. Just go ahead and start all 3 of the bolts, run them in until they're snug. And then once they're snug, then I tighten all 3 of them by hand. So when I do this, I use 1/4" tools to tighten these down. They don't have to be super tight. You just tighten them up until they're snug and about a 1/4 turn more. Now I'm going to take a rag and wipe off the mating surface of the transmission like this to remove any of the fluid, and also make sure that there's no old pieces of the gasket on there. If there are, scrape it off. I also use a little bit of brake clean and spray it around the edge on the perimeter here and wash off any of the transmission fluid. Now what I'm going to do is wash off all the bolts, get all the transmission fluid off the bolts that came out. Then I put a little bit of blue thread locker on all the bolts. This is like a little glue to help prevent these bolts from vibrating loose and causing transmission pan leaks. Now you can place the gasket onto the pan and then put the bolts through the gasket, and the gasket will hold the bolts into place. If you're using a quart gasket or a different style, you may want to glue the gasket to the pan using 3M super adhesive black weather stripping glue. I'll be sure to link up the 3M weather stripping and the thread locker. Before I install the pan, I give it one last quick wipe down to make sure it's nice and dry. Then I lift the pan into position, and then what I do is I use my little 3/8 impact gun here and slowly screw a couple of the screws in until they're snug. So this tool has a variable trigger that allows me to slowly rotate all the screws in at a very slow pace. That way I don't cross thread any of the bolts. This has been a great tool for me. I recommend you check it out. I'll leave a link for it in the description of the video. Once you get all the bolts started and snug, I use a 1/4" ratchet, and I'll start in one corner and I'll tighten them up until it's good and snug, and in about a 1/4 turn or so more, you kind of feel the gasket crush down. Then I'll skip the next bolt, and I'll tighten that bolt, and then I'll skip the next bolt, and I'll tighten this bolt, and I'll skip the next one, and keep going around until I get back to the corner. And then I do all the ones that I skipped before. I'll tighten all those up. After that, I'll reinstall the drain plug and tighten that up with the new crush washer. Now I'll reinstall the support bracket here. I put a little bit of that blue thread locker on the bolts here, and I put it in position and run the bolts in until they're snug. And I just tightened it up with the impact gun here. I didn't have a torque spec on it, so I'm guessing they're right around 75, 80 foot-pounds. I'll go ahead and tighten those up. Now you're ready to lift the lower shield back into place and bolt it back up. Now we lower it back down, and we're going to fill it up with transmission fluid. The dipstick is right next to the battery here. So go ahead and pull out the dipstick. Then you're going to need a funnel, and then you're going to fill it up with 4 quarts of Toyota WS transmission fluid. So I went ahead and put in 3.5 quarts. Then I went and started the vehicle. Now I'm going to run the vehicle through all the gear selects. And as I selected every gear, I like to leave it in there for a second or two so you can feel the transmission engage in all the selections. And then I run it back up to park. Now with the engine still running, I'll reinsert the dipstick, and I'll check the level. And it may require you insert the dipstick and pull it out quite a few times to get an accurate reading. So after checking mine was pretty low, so I added the other 1/2 quart, so it's up to 4 quarts total, and that put me right in the cold portion of it right here. So now what I'm going to do is reinsert the dipstick, take the car for a quick little test drive around the block, and get the transmission nice and hot, and double check it when the transmission's warm. You want the fluid to read right up to the second notches on the dipstick. So after your test drive, you may have to add a little bit. So you don't want to overfill it, so fill it up in smaller increments until it's reached the top, the second set of notches. So I'll be sure to link up the transmission filter kit and all the fluids and tools that I use in this video in the description. I'm Brian Essa from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this, and I'd like to thank you again for watching.